Well, pal, it's about 15 degrees out.
Yes.
So where are we today, and what are we doing here?
Well, we're away from home. We're not in New Hampshire today. We are in Maine.
Yeah.
And we are in the village of York, Maine.
Yes, we are. I figured that out.
Okay, that's good. We're here today to visit two Moody's, both of them ministers.
Right.
And this is the grave of Samuel Moody that is in front of us right here.
That's right. And this was quite a character.
Oh, he was. Yes.
But how did we got here? Because of somebody else that we were looking at.
Yes.
And well, why don't you tell us? I mean, why did we?
Well, I think a lot of people, if especially if you were an English major or if you're our age and were forced to read a lot, including Hawthorne, you probably are familiar with, of course, the Scarlet Letter. And but Hawthorne wrote some amazing short stories.
He did,
and one of them is called "The Minister's Black Veil,"
and it is actually, I think. I mean, both of us are big Hawthorne fans.
Yes.
And we're especially fans of his short stories.
Absolutely.
And we are definitely a fan of the Minister's Black Veil.
Yes.
And the reason we're here is this is his, well, the Minister's Black Veil is based on
that's a true story.
More or less true story, not more or less. And this is the father.
Yes. Samuel was Handkerchief Moody's father.
And the man Handkerchief Moody was who the story by Hawthorne was based on.
Right. And he's not buried here.
No.
We'll take a little extra road trip here in a little bit.
Yeah.
And we'll visit his grave, which is right up the road in another cemetery.
Yeah. Hope it's not too hard to find.
Yes, I hope not. And I hope the temperature warms up to at least 30.
Yeah. Good luck. Well, tell us a little bit about, I think we probably want to talk, just mention Handkerchief. I think we have.
Yes.
But Handkerchief did wear a mask over him. He was a minister.
Yes.
And of course, and Hawthorne heard this story.
Yes.
And as an artist and as a writer, he couldn't resist working with that.
Yes. He embellished the story quite a bit and made it his own. But Samuel was no less a character.
Yeah.
And we both concluded that he was certainly a good man. So good that he gave away his possessions willy-nilly, in fact, including his wife's only pair of shoes. He gave away to another impoverished woman.
Right, and the shoes were replaced.
Yes, apparently a neighbor took pity on her and got her a pair of shoes. Yeah. But he was the chaplain of the military force that took the fortress in Louisburg, if I'm pronouncing that right. And he was very, very much of a Puritan minister of his time, kind of, I guess, a hellfire and brimfire, if you will. He was known to have quite a temper, kind of cranky. He dragged the drunks out of the local
That's right. He would go into the bars.
But on the day that the force left for Louisburg, he stood on the deck of the ship and raised an axe and said he was going to, once they had captured the city, the fortress, he was going to wreck the church, take an axe to the Catholic Church.
Yeah,
which he did.
Which he did. Yeah, he did not. He did not approve of the Catholic Church, and I guess what he interpreted as icons, and he decided to make a point, and apparently made it. The reason we ended up here, though, is because he was the father of Handkerchief Moody, who was Reverend Joseph Moody. Joseph Moody, which we're going to tell you a little bit about, did a number of things, but his dad was one of those people who wanted to make his son do what he wanted him to do. In other words, the dad wanted him to do.
Yes.
And the story may be that he was forced into the ministry.
Yes.
And that will lead us, I think, into the story of Handkerchief.
Right.
But we probably should tell that when we get over there.
Yes. But, yes, he was, but I think, there's no question he was loved by his parishioners here in York. He certainly saw some very tough times. He witnessed or was
Yeah.
involved in a massacre by the Native Americans here,
Yeah.
which a number of his parishioners were killed in that attack. Um, but he was, I say, a little eccentric. And
Well,
he seemed to have passed that on down to his son.
Well, he did keep a diary,
That was
which
his son.
was in code.
Yeah, no, that was his son.
That was his son. Sorry.
Yes, that's.
Yes, you're right.
Yeah.
I keep making mistakes.
Yeah,
Why is that?
Because it's cold out here.
But anyway, yes, you're absolutely right. It was
Yeah.
the son who did that, and
Yeah.
we will get into that when we
Yes.
get to the other grave.
Yeah. But this is a fascinating little place here in
Um,
York. If you haven't visited, there's a number of very historical buildings that date back to the late 1600s. And there's a lady over here that is reputed to be a witch.
Yes.
I've never seen so many grave goods on one grave as there is on hers. Fellow just stopped by to say that she was very popular on Halloween Eve.
Yeah.
So I don't doubt it for a moment. But this is a fascinating place, and you really should visit this place if you come to York to go to the beaches or to have a lobster feed or whatever. Take a few moments to check out the museum here, and particularly this little cemetery.
But probably ought to do it on a little bit warmer day.
Yes, I would recommend doing it in the summer.
Yes.
Of course, parking is easier right now.
That's true. Well, Samuel.
Yes.
And I believe this is
his wife. Yes. Yeah, he had two wives.
He did have two wives.
Yes.
And apparently there was a connection with, I believe, the first wife. And I'm not sure exactly how it went, but that did lead into the Emerson family.
Yes, I think their daughter.
The daughter
married. One of the daughters. Yes, and it was the first wife. Her daughter.
Yeah.
She married into the Emerson family, and I believe she's buried in Concord, in Massachusetts.
Yep.
So.
Well, Samuel.
Yes, you've given us a great story, and rest in peace.
Rest in peace. Well, here we are.
Yes, we are, Rick. We're still in York.
We are still in York.
We're out on a road called Cider Hill Road.
Yeah.
And as you undoubtedly can hear, there's a lot of traffic going by, so our audio may be a little off.
All right. Well, this is where Joseph.
This is Joseph
Reverend
Moody.
Joseph Moody is buried.
Yes, and he is the man who wore the veil.
Yeah. Well, it's an interesting story. I don't know that anyone can really tell you exactly why he wore it. He did have some incidences in his life.
Yes.
You had kind of a theory which was interesting, that he might have even been, was bipolar or something like that. Because he does seem to have he was a very effective minister.
Yes. He was very well loved by his congregation.
Right. And yet he showed up at some point with this mask, which I believe was white.
Was actually white, yes. As we said, Hawthorne truly embellished the story, which was fine. He's an artist.
He's a writer,
That was the way he wrote. Nothing wrong with that. He made a great story. Yeah. But it increased the legend of Joseph Moody.
Yeah.
And to a lot of what Hawthorne said became fact. Well, it wasn't, and it isn't. He did wear a white veil, apparently, and for probably less than a year.
Well, the interesting thing is what would make a man or a woman or anybody, or for that matter, but especially a minister, to suddenly decide to wear a veil. And you can sort of understand that if you were a member of that church and suddenly your minister shows up for a year wearing this mask. Now, there were some things that happened. At a very young age, he was involved with an accident apparently with a firearm.
Yes, with a pistol.
With a pistol, where a little friend of his, how old?
He was 8 years old.
8 years old, and his friend was killed.
Yes,
and that's something you would have to live with,
right?
For the rest of your life.
That led to another story, that the reason he wore the veil, which apparently is fiction, was that he killed a friend while hunting, and then his father made him spend the night in repentance with the corpse of his friend.
I've seen that story.
Apparently contributed to his depression. There's no question he seemed to be a man.
Now, is that later story about the hunting that's been it's been questioned?
Yes, it's pretty much debunked from what I've read. But the first story is true, no doubt. So the second story,
well, we weren't. In any case, I mean, he had. There was I think if I were even at 8 years old, I'd have a hard time living.
Yes, absolutely.
The rest of my life.
The other thing is previous to when he adorned himself with the white veil, his wife and his daughter, died in childbirth. They died together in childbirth.
Yeah.
And that undoubtedly would have depressed anybody. And he seemed to be a man who did kind of slip in and out of depression.
And it's interesting that apparently it happens in the Hawthorne story too, but apparently his ministry, so to speak, was a fairly sort of lower key ministry, I believe. And I know Hawthorne gets into this, but once he had the mask on there, he became much more, his ministry became much more effective, I guess. We can't really prove that. Hawthorne does make a point of that, though, that once the black veil in the Hawthorne story is on, that minister has become more effective as a minister. So there was hardship there.
Yes. And after the death of his wife and his child, when he did put the veil on, apparently he did leave the church for a while, but it was probably less than a year. And when he came back, he was welcomed with open arms by his congregation.
Well, before he became a minister, apparently he was a teacher. He apparently worked in local government, was really very highly thought of. And again, some of the stories go that he was really quite satisfied, happy, relatively content in those lifestyles, or doing those jobs, but that his father, the man we visited earlier in this video, Samuel, really applied intense pressure for him to become a minister.
That's probably true. Yeah,
and perhaps that was a reaction to that too. We don't know. It's interesting that, of course, Hawthorne, being, a writer who dealt a lot with the Puritan ethic, sin, the concept of sin, who carries sin, who's responsible, and dealing with a lot of the religious beliefs at that time. The most famous probably Hawthorne story is Hester de Perrin. And she had to wear the badge for adultery, and to some degree, is this mask in the minister's black veil, was that mask the same kind of thing, that he's basically putting on something to wear his sin for everybody? Hard to say. There are various parts of that story where. At the beginning, after he puts his veil on, there's a young lady who dies, and he looks down at her, is my recollection, and the mask kind of comes off a little bit, so she could have seen it if she were alive, but she doesn't, so he pulls it right back down again. So the implication might be, was there a sin here? He did refuse to take it off, and he also refused. He would not marry his fiancée, who did indeed. And this is in the Hawthorne story. And the fiancée did stick with him all those years, even to his death. but that did not come off until his death. And at the last moment, I believe, if I remember correctly, he looks out and the whole congregation has black masks on. So is he carrying the sins of his own? Is he carrying the sins of all of us? Or I still believe one of the themes in Hawthorne is that he gives up his wife, into some other stories where he's so obsessed with something, Rappaccini's daughter, young Goodman Brown, that he actually gives up what would have been a life because of this obsession. I don't know.
Well, it is interesting.
I'm getting a little off the back.
Well, we should say we both, as we said before, we both have a lifelong interest in Hawthorne. Yeah. And Rick has a rather intimate story because Hawthorne went to Bowdoin College.
That's correct.
And Rick is a graduate of Bowdoin College.
Yeah, I didn't know.
Yeah. Well, I have said long ago he was his roommate, but apparently that is not true.
No, there is no truth to that. And I did not know about Franklin Pierce either.
Well, anyway, it is a wonderful story. This cemetery is not really hard to find. We found it easy enough after a couple of little turns, but it is in a precarious place.
Yes,
it's very difficult to find a place to park. So, we're going to kind of cut this short. Plus, it's cold still.
It hasn't got any warmer.
No, it hasn't got any warmer.
Cemetery.
Yes.
Well, I think we can probably more or less end it there, but I think it's just an interesting story.
It is.
Interesting, the relationship between the father and the son, the fact that Nathaniel Hawthorne was so impressed by the story that he wrote his version of it, and the interpretation is pretty much up to whoever wants to go back and read the Minister's Black Veil.
And we don't want to forget, we did mention that Joseph kept a very detailed diary.
Yes, that's right.
And it was written in Latin.
Yeah.
And apparently coded.
Yeah.
And today the diary still exists.
Yeah.
And apparently the code has been broken. And you can read parts of it on the internet. And it's a fascinating account. I mean, first of all, he does seem to be preoccupied with death, but he was a minister.
Yeah.
And undoubtedly he would have, conducted a lot of those funerals of the people he mentioned. Yeah. But like his father, he encountered, Indian wars, raids in the area. He mentions that in the diary. He mentions pirates off the coast of Maine. It's another fascinating little piece of the man. And, what a detailed man he was to have kept this diary. Yeah. Interesting that he kept it in code, but nonetheless.
Well, it's interesting. The other thing is, of course, and it comes up in a lot of the stories that we wrote for our book, Buried in Hampshire, which is coming out supposedly in April 2025. But that it was a very difficult time to live. I mean, whether you were an indigenous person, people from that were originally here, or whether you were from the white folks, that it was very, very dangerous time to be.
Yeah.
And that basically it was, he may have felt that, and that it was reflected. I think we also need to point out that this particular story we're doing is not in the book.
Yes, we're stepping outside of our comfort zone. We are
stepping out of our area a little bit because we wanted to get back out and do some videos, even when it's so cold that it's unimaginable. But anyway, So anyway, are we ready to?
I think so.
I think we are. Joseph, Reverend Joseph.
Yes, rest in peace.
Rest in peace.
I think you were a fascinating man.
Yes.